So, hello and welcome back to Women for Wealth. So, today I want to take a little bit of a different tact. I want to talk politics. And no, I'm not going to talk who's good or bad because honestly, I think they're all bad. All right, Miss Willow, let me sit you down. You go back to producing, get on the couch. There you go, Willow. I had to make sure Willow was settled. But no, I honestly, 20 and 30-year-olds no longer have the ability to live the American dream. And I think that's heartbreaking. And, we need to talk about that because, ladies, you need to have the opportunity to build wealth. That is so important to have the opportunity to build wealth. And right now, if you're in your 20s or 30s, you can't build wealth. You can't even live the American dream. So here's my take on what I think the government should do to help young adults, especially women, live the American dream again and have the opportunity to pursue wealth and happiness. So let's be real. Gen Z and millennials, they're not asking for yachts and mansions. They're asking for stability. They're asking for, hey, give me an opportunity. Let me see how there's a future for me. And right now, the math is tough. But here's the good news. If the government steps in and does a couple of these things, I think it can make a huge difference. So let's break it down. My first thing I think the government ought to do is make housing attainable again. Ladies, homeownership is the number one path to generational wealth. But for people in their 20s and 30s, buying a home feels like it's an impossibility. So what can the government do? They can step in and encourage affordable starter homes, not just luxury builds. The government should offer down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. They should limit big corporations from buying entire neighborhoods and turning them into rentals. And that is something that happened in a neighborhood that we used to live in North Carolina. BlackRock subsidiary came in and cashed down, bought every house in the neighborhood and turned it all into rentals. And what was a really nice, really clean neighborhood with really good neighbors and really good people really went downhill. I mean, it went from being a nice place to live to a dangerous place to live within like 5 years. And I'm not saying that people that rent houses are bad. I'm not. I'm just saying that in 5 years of that community becoming a rental community, you had degenerates, you had auto theft, you had drug usage. It was not safe. You couldn't walk around the neighborhood and feel safe anymore. And that's a shame. So big corporations, they need to stop buying our houses. We need to limit that. We need to make sure that individual citizens have a chance to buy a house. Number 2, lower the cost of childcare. I raised 4 kids with my husband. Childcare was expensive, but it was doable. I think it was $60 per kid per week. And now I hear people paying $200, $300, $400 a week per kid. That is unsustainable. And we're not talking child care centers that are doing education. We're talking, daycares that just make sure the kids are physically okay. They sit the kids down, crisscross applesauce in the living room, put on a Disney movie, and then they walk away. And $400 a week for that is insane. So let's have tax credits that actually match real child care cost. Let's incentivize employers to offer on-site or subsidized child care. And let's have more public childhood programs, early childhood programs. I think right now that, a kid starts school, kindergarten's 5. I think they've got like 4K kindergarten at some elementary schools now. But when you have a baby, that baby can't go to public school until they're 4 or 5 years old. So you've got to figure out how you're going to take care of them. Are you going to stay home? Are you going to pay for daycare? What are you going to do? And, it'd be nice if they had earlier childhood programs for women who have a child that want to send them somewhere to not just be babysat, but to get an education. And, I had a great opportunity with my son. I was going to upstate, and the college there had a program where every master's level education student had to volunteer so many clinic hours in the daycare. And so I would go to school with my son. I would take him to the daycare center, which was an educational program. And again, it was fully staffed by kids that were in a master's program for education, early childhood education. So you had some of the best and the brightest, and they were taking care and educating your kids. When I got done with school, I would go pick them up and we would go home together. And that was a blessing. We need more stuff like that. We just do, because we need to be able to have more babies. And right now, I've got, two of my 4 kids. They said we can't afford a child. We can't afford to buy a house, much less have a child. And that's heartbreaking because I want to be a crazy grandma someday. So we'll see. I don't know. Number 3, and this is going to be a big one because I know a lot of people are passionate about it, but I truly believe education is the path to wealth. And I believe that it's important for women to get an education. And so we have got to reduce the cost of education without trapping our next generation in debt. I know it's not, popular, but I truly believe that the federal government student loan debt should be wiped off. I think going forward, they shouldn't give as much out. I think, and maybe in the future they privatize it. I don't know. But I think that the students that have student loan debt today, I think it should be forgiven. I just do. The average student getting out of college today has $23,000 in debt. So before they even clock their first hour as an employee, which, by the way, some kids are graduating and 9, 12 months later still don't have a job, we need to look at that. We need to expand vocational and trade programs. We need more apprenticeships. We need to cap interest on federal student loans. And again, I think once we, forgive all the student loan debt that exists going forward, it should not be federal. I think it should be private. And I do think the interest rates should be capped. And require colleges to disclose real outcomes, job placement, salaries, because if these universities are charging $100,000 for a bachelor's in counseling, which they do, and then, a student graduates with a degree in counseling and can't find a job. And when they do find a job, they're making $32,000 a year when they've got $43,000 worth of student loan debt. How are they going to pay that debt off? How are they going to be able to save up money to be able to afford a down payment on a house? The math just ain't mathing, as they say. In Q2 of 2025, there's $1.81 trillion in student loan debt. But there's so much waste. I mean, Doge showed us how much waste is in the government. If we just stop wasting money and stop sending money to other governments and say, you know what? We're not going to send aid external to the U.S. until we have our stuff taken care of. Let's take care of our house first. USAID wasted $2 billion in a year, and they did this year after year after year. Let's get rid of that, and let's wipe out student loan debt with that money. Number 4, we need to reward hard work. Women in their 20s and 30s, they're working very hard, but it feels like the system can be stacked against them. The earned income tax credit, it needs to be earned. If you're not paying taxes, I completely disagree with people getting a big fat check. I got $2,000 or I got $6,000 back from the government. Well, how much did you pay? How many taxes did you pay? What percentage of your income in taxes did you pay? If you didn't pay into the system, I don't think you should get money back out. But I do believe that the tax rate should be reduced, and I do believe that earned income tax credit should be a thing, and young adults should be able to get most, if not all, of the money they pay into taxes back so that they can get out of debt, they can save their money, they can save for a deposit, and they can be able to buy a house, be able to get married, be able to have children. Because once we start having more population, once that's gone and I think it's 3 generations where more people die than are babies born every year. It's a crisis for that country. Literally, the country can die due to lack of the next generation being born. And that's where we're at today. More people die in the US every year than are born. And that's because kids don't see the ability to afford children. So we've got to change that if we want to be able to stabilize and make the US go on for hundreds and hundreds of years, which I hope and pray that it does. But we've got to take steps today to ensure our future tomorrow. And I think this crippling debt is more critical than any of the things that they're trying to push down your throat. Climate change, AI scares, satellites, comets, I don't know. Whatever the government's trying to scare you with, to me, debt and lack of kids having kids, we need our children to have grandchildren for us so that we can continue as a species. I think that's much more critical. Making it easier to get a license and work across states. That is very important, and not just from needing to be able to cross state lines, but also because all these rules and regulations and certifications and requirements, it's ridiculous. It's a barrier to entry. When you have someone who has to go through 2 years of vocational school, then pass a test, and then get continuing education just to cut hair, something that grows and needs to be recut in 4 to 6 weeks. Y'all, that does not make sense to me. We have gone regulation, certification crazy, and predominantly it's from these companies, in my opinion, that make money off of this. Engineering has it too. The NCEES, they claim that their registration is all about public safety. Y'all, I've been in the industry for a long time. I've known PE registered engineers that couldn't engineer their way out of a paper bag. I mean, it's sad. And then I've met other people who were phenomenal, just really sharp, really knew their stuff, and they didn't pass the PE exam. I do understand something like engineering probably needs an extra level, an extra layer, because, if I do something wrong, yes, somebody could die. And that is serious. And you need to make sure that whoever's practicing does have the education. But a hairdresser? I don't think a hairdresser needs 2 years of vocation plus an exam plus continuing education just to cut hair. It's just my opinion. And all those things take time. All those things take money. Some of those things take preparation. It's just a barrier to entry. It's a way to make it harder. It's a way to make large companies that don't want the competition. It's a way for them to keep their market value because they can prevent competition from coming into the market. When the system rewards effort, women raise. That's just a fact. And so you need to support women and all 20 and 30-year-olds in this country. Let's have first-time homebuyer and small business owner support. That's something we just don't have. Entrepreneurship is a great way to build generational wealth. Many, many young women have so many talents and abilities. They want to start side hustles. They want to start small businesses. Maybe they want to do online income streams. Let's get back to where we support entrepreneurship for women. And currently the SBA does not do that. I mean, the SBA loan, in my opinion, has never been great. But now, to obtain a loan, you got to not need a loan. And then if you get a loan, 100% of your assets are used as collateral. So for example, I have an SBA loan. All of the collateral is everything I own, every asset I own. And I'm like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense that you're taking assets as collateral that exceed the value of the loan. Now you tell me how that makes sense. And I asked this multiple times. I think I asked 3 different times, 3 different people within the SBA process. And every single one of them said, sorry, it's just how the government does it. That's how the SBA does it. If you don't want an SBA loan, you don't have to sign. But if the SBA is going to do a loan, your assets 100% have to be used, including my primary residence. Now, if I were to file Chapter 11 bankruptcy, I'd at least get to keep my house. If I were to default on an SBA loan, I would lose my primary residence. I would be homeless because of an SBA loan. That is insane. That needs to change. And again, I asked that for clarification. Not that I'm going to default because I'm making payments and all my payments are paid on time and I've never had a late payment. But still, there's a problem in the system. And microloans, I bootstrapped my company. I didn't start with a lot of money. I'm not rich. I don't have deep pockets. But it would have been nice, if I could have got a $20,000 microloan, something like that. Just, even $800 microloan just to buy my first computer. That would have taken a little bit of burden off my personal finances. But those today are not available anymore. The government needs to reduce red tape for small business formation, and we need to give tax breaks to businesses. Women want to build wealth. Women want to take care of their next generation. We need to put a system in place that allows the next generation of women, the 20 and 30-year-olds, to fulfill the American dream and to seek wealth. So what else can the government do to help? Also, my backyard. Invest in the power grid and infrastructure. I'm a power engineer, so I'm passionate about this. Of course, I had to throw it in there. Young adults, they're used to remote work, digital careers, being digital nomads, electric vehicles, AIs, online businesses. Guess what doesn't work without power? All of the above. We need reliable power and reliable connectivity. So we need to continue to fund grid modernization. We need to expand broadband, especially in rural areas. We need to support EV infrastructure. EV vehicles are never going to take hold if we don't have enough charging locations so that people don't feel afraid of running out of power, when they're trying to get somewhere. We truly, as a country, need to really invest in energy resilience. Modern dreams need modern infrastructure, and we need to focus on that. Number 7, expand access to financial literacy. This is a huge one for women. I'm a Southerner. You can probably tell from the accent. But in the South, you don't talk about money. It's taboo. It is unacceptable to talk about money. It's just, it's considered uncouth. So you don't learn about money at all because you're not allowed to talk about it. If you're not allowed to talk about it, you're not going to learn. And so we need financial literacy programs in high school. I used to volunteer with Junior Achievement, and they had a section in their program where we talked about, just basic personal finance. And I used to volunteer, and I used to go into schools and teach this training program. I thought it was really great. I think we need more of that. I think we need, you take economics and finance and government classes in high school. One of those sections should be on personal finance. Free federal resources on budgeting and investing. We need to teach people how to budget. We need to teach people how to invest. Compound interest can be an amazing thing or it can be a horrible thing. If you're paying compound interest, you are losing the game. If you are receiving compound interest through an asset, then you are winning at the game. And so you need to understand the power of compound interest, what it is, how it works, when it benefits, when it doesn't. If you have credit cards, for example, credit cards are the fastest way to being poor. I truly believe that. But you don't hear that. You don't get that education. One of the things I've done as an employer is I had financial education offered to my employees in the past, specifically budgeting. I even paid for Smart Dollar, I think is the Dave Ramsey budgeting app. And I paid for that for all my employees for a full year. And so that's something, employers can offer as an incentive to their employees. Final thoughts. The American dream isn't gone. It's just harder to reach. Political moves can definitely help with housing, childcare, education, work incentives, entrepreneurship, infrastructure, and financial literacy. Young women can still build wealth, build confidence, and build the life they deserve. Ladies, you are powerful. When you understand the system, you can win and beat the system. And I'm here to help you do that. I think you've taken a great step by watching this video, getting the free education. Again, I take what I do here seriously. I'm an electrical engineer. I've got a BSEE and an MBA. I run my own business. I'm not a personal finance person. I'm not a CPA. I can't advise you how to do this. I'm here telling you what I've done, what worked for me, how I did it. And also, I do take this seriously. I do research. I didn't just, think this up on a whim. I actually thought about this, and several of these I kind of jotted down on a sheet of paper. I'm kind of old school like that. You can tell I like pen and paper, and I jotted these things down over time, and then I went back and I did a little bit deeper dive. And so I hope you appreciate what I'm doing here. If you do, please like, subscribe, and comment below. Let me know if I'm doing something that's valuable. Because y'all, I've been doing this for a year and a half. I've got no feedback. I'm not monetized. And if there's no need, if there's no value in what I'm doing here, my time's valuable. Life is short and precious. There's something else I could be doing. I choose to do this to hopefully help other women to achieve wealth and financial stability, and also generational wealth. Hopefully your kids are going to be in a position where they can afford to buy a house and afford to have kids. When you've got grandchildren, you want to be able to financially take care of that generation too, of those kids. And so let's figure out, let's put a game plan in place. How are we going to get there? And once you have a plan, then it's just executing the plan. Getting the plan is the hard part. And y'all, there's so much information out there. First of all, start with a budget. You got to start with a budget. I've done many budgeting videos. You can probably find them below where they're linked. But until the next time, I wish you health and wealth.